Well,
was this, we're going to increase everybody's quality of life by taking from you and giving to her?
No, there was actually debate between Madison and Hamilton as to what they meant. And Madison had a much more constrained view of it, that it would basically mean that Congress could only exercise the enumerated powers you talked about earlier in pursuing the general welfare. In other words, if Congress had the authority to pursue some program under the Constitution, then that was okay. That was almost by definition the general welfare. Hamilton looked at it much more expansively as a means of giving the national government greater authority to actually decide what's in the general welfare and act accordingly. What the Supreme Court finally did in this decision was go with Hamilton and say
on
the Social Security Act. But the way that they interpreted it meant that from here on out, the redistribution of wealth through congressional edict would be business as usual.
Because that promotes the welfare.
The general welfare, as Congress, in its sole prerogative, determines.
All right, so this is not left to the states.
Nope.
I think people forget about this because if you're my age, you think of government as D.C. We've always been so very D.C.-centric. We think about Washington constantly and that Washington runs our lives. That's actually a pretty recent phenomenon. It was, as Reagan said when he was sworn in, let's remember it was the states that created the federal government, not the other way around. It seems like the decisions that you put in the Dirty Dozen really do exactly the opposite.
That's right. They consolidate power into the executive and legislative branch at the federal level, and we've just seen that play out increasingly to this very day.
Why are the courts getting it wrong in these decisions?
Well, they're getting it wrong because they view their role improperly. They view it as their prerogative to amend the Constitution. You know, the words in the Constitution haven't changed since the ratification. But what's happened is they've been interpreted to mean sometimes 180 degrees different meaning than what was originally intended. And the court thinks it's got the authority to simply decide what's the best policy.
Well, explain to me why they don't have that authority. They're the friggin' Supreme Court. If they want to say the Commerce Clause includes a guy growing wheat, or as in a recent case that if growing medical marijuana as actually a interstate issue because it will increase or decrease the demand in that area, which might increase or decrease the demand for pulling it over state boundaries, therefore they can regulate medical marijuana. If they're the Supreme Court.
They are the Supreme Court, but that doesn't mean that they can make it up as they go along. They are constrained by the Constitution, and the Constitution is a wonderful document that sets forth the vision of government you described a minute ago when you talked about enumerated powers being given to the government. In other words, if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, the power to tax, the power to raise an army, different things, if it's not expressly given to government by the Constitution, then the government doesn't have the authority to act in that regard, regardless of what the Supreme Court says. What's happened is that over the years, the Supreme Court has basically transformed the Constitution from providing basically a sea of liberty with on islands of government power into a situation that today we have islands of liberty in a sea of government power.
Let's take a few more of these stories, because these stories are good. And how did you come down with a dozen of them, by the way, other than good alliteration, because every good book has good alliteration?
Well, it was basically, we asked a number of our colleagues in the legal profession, 75 to be exact, what they would do to nominate the worst Supreme Court cases. And it turned out we got a list and we narrowed it down, and it came out to about 15. We picked a dozen thinking that was a good round number, and all of them going to very profoundly important issues that affect people in America today in a big way.
Let's talk about one that you were very involved with. One that we thought, our team, we thought this is going to be a slam dunk. I mean, how could it not? The Bill of Rights is pretty clear. Government can't take your property. It's right there. They can't take your property unless they're going to use it for a public use. We understand why that's necessary. If there's only one place to put a road and it goes through your house, they're going to take your house and they have to compensate you fair market value for it. I understand that. We free market guys, we understand that is a proper role of a limited government. How else are we going to have parks? How else are we going to have roadways? How are we going to have railroads? If we weren't going to build a school and that's the place to do it, we understand that. Mm-hmm. But I never thought that government could take my property and give it to some other private guy because they think it's good. Now, you were at the center of this storm. Explain what happened and give some color to this incredible woman who was at the center of it with
This
you.
is the battle that Suzette Kelo, a single mom from New London, Connecticut, waged to save her home from the use of eminent domain to take that home and give it to a developer to put in high-end condominiums and office complex and luxury hotel in this neighborhood.
Why would a government want to do that, first of all? I mean, here's a voter. You don't want to hack off the voters. Take a voter's property and give it to somebody who's going to put in high-end condominiums or a hotel or a meeting room.
Well,
what's in it for them?
It's a sad reality that more and more today we'll find in state and city governments tax hungry. City planners, tax-hungry politicians, and they see this as a means of bringing in someone that they think may pay more taxes or create more jobs, displace the existing landowners, and put in this.
So in other words, you take a little house that some lady is living there by herself and you put it in a Walmart, you're not only going to make more off the property tax, you're also going to make money off the sales tax, you're going to make money off the people who come there and go to the hotels there, do whatever.
Yes. You're
going to make more money. So therefore, government's got an interest to take that land and give it to the highest bidder, basically.
That's right. And now that, of course, doesn't address the fact that most of these projects never come close to raising the amount of money or tax base that they are promised to raise. But, you know,
tell me a little bit about Suzette Kilo, because
well,
she seems like an interesting lady.
Suzette Kilo.
Tell me the truth. Is this a little pink house? Is this literally a little pink house?
It is a little pink house. In fact, there's a wonderful brand new book that's just been published called The Little Pink House. This story of the battle Suzette Kilo and her neighbors waged.
So this could be a Jon Mellor song. This is little pink houses for you and me.
This is a home that she bought overlooking the river there in New London, Connecticut, restored herself and painted it this salmon pink color, and lived there with her husband, and was doing just fine for the first 3 months after she had bought it and restored it, when she got a knock on the door the day before Thanksgiving and was served with a notice that she had to be out of her home in 90 days. The bulldozers were coming.
90-day notice.
90 days.
3 months.
Yep.
The house that she just restored.
Yep.
She bought. She's living there 90 days. Excuse me, it's time for you to leave.
And it's important to recognize that she wasn't alone. The entire neighborhood was being victimized by eminent domain, and it was a wonderfully vibrant neighborhood. There was nothing wrong with this neighborhood. In fact, people had been living there in some instances for 3 generations. And it was a very tight-knit community, a solid working-class community, and yet it was deemed expendable because they wanted to bring in this high-end development project, which, of course, has never happened to this day.
You represented Suzette Kilo, you and the good folks at the Institute for Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And this one went all the way to the Supreme Court, which I know gets your juices going, because this is what you live for. This is what you dedicated your life to do. Tell me a little bit of what it's like being at the Supreme Court, hearing the arguments for it, when the case was, does the government have the right to take from you and say it is public use to give your property to a private owner? That is, to take your little house and give it to Walmart.
This was an enormously exciting day because it was the culmination of an 8-year campaign that we had waged around the country to elevate this issue of eminent domain abuse to the Supreme Court, not just with Suzette Kilo's case, but with a half dozen other cases that we've been bringing around the country simultaneously to try and percolate it up to the court. It happened that they took Suzette's case, which we happen to think was also the strongest case, because the whole issue is, can this just naked transfer of property without any claim that they were addressing blight or slum clearance or anything that was in any way harmful to the public, but was done for no other reason than to allegedly and theoretically create more taxes and jobs, would that be constitutional? And walking into the court that day, it was a jam-packed standing room only argument in the court. It was clear that it had gotten on the national conscience in a big way, and then when, of course, the decision came down and Suzette Kilo lost.
What was the vote? It was 5-4.
It was a bitterly close loss.
I remember talking to you afterwards, and I remember you personally. It was a gut punch to you. I mean,
Totally.
It was a gut punch to the whole movement. You know, left or right, you think that government can't take your home and give it to some corporation. You thought that was one of the protections in the Bill of Rights, and we found out it wasn't. And even somebody as moderate as Sandra Day O'Connor, she had some pretty tough words about it.